Hello, good afternoon, dear webinar participants. Thank you for joining our webinar on water safety planning, participatory approach to delivering clean water in rural and peri-urban Ghana. My name is Natalia Pegay. I'm a program officer for SDG Philanthropy Platform based in Istanbul, and we're happy to have you with us today. Let me tell you briefly about the webinar. The webinar itself is for 1 hour with 30 minutes presentation, and then we'll have a session for you to ask the questions. If you have any questions, you can ask them in advance by posting their questions in the chat box. And after the presentation, you'll have the opportunity to ask these questions in person. Without further ado, I would like to give a floor to my colleague, Isaac Debra, who is our National Coordinator for SDG Philanthropy Platform in Ghana. Isaac will do the introduction of the presenter. Isaac, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and sorry for the initial problems we're having with our presentation. So I would take you through my presentation from using this outline. I'll look at the project background and objectives, then the approach, activities, output, results, the lessons learned for application and scale up, then the efforts that are being done, and then the way forward. So I want to first start from the rural water supply situation in Ghana. And I want to look at the current infrastructure that we have and the kind of output it's generating. So for those who don't understand the system in Ghana, I want to look at the infrastructure that we have, which is a pipe system, a small town system, which is about 914 all over the country, which is then point sources, which is about 32,261, and then rain harvesting systems. And you could see GWCL, which is Ghana Water Company Limited, which has the mandate of supplying water to only urban areas. But they also supply water to some rural areas, which serves about 602 communities. Then when you look at the management, you look at the community operations and management, or district operations and management, or you can say district ownership and management. And then you look at the lead agency, which is Community Water Sanitation Agency. It's responsible for the provision of infrastructure, regulation, technical, and monitoring support. And then you look at the output that is being provided. When you look at our access to water, basic services, looking at the graph you have on the right side, we can see that for basic78 which is the light blue, when you look at the national, we have about 78% of the population having access to basic services. Then when you look at rural, it's about 66%. But when you look at safely managed, it's about 7%. And let's go back to the new challenge we have. At first, the MDGs looks at only access to water, improved water within a particular radius. But now the indicators or the requirements is that you should have water in your premises, and water must be available when needed and free from all contamination. So if you use this criteria to apply to what we have now, the current situation, we only have about 7% of our population who have access to safely managed water, which means we have about 93% of our rural folks to serve with safely managed water. So that is the situation we have in our country, and you could see that we've highlighted free from contamination, which means that there are quality issues that we have to look at, and there are access issues we have to look at moving forward. So at the national level, there have been several efforts that have been made to ensure that our water is clean. So in 2004, for example, they have an urban sector water safety plan, which wasn't really implemented. In 2010, we have the rural water safety framework, which wasn't really implemented. And then between 2012 and 2014, we have the national household water treatment strategy, which is part of the rural sanitation model. That was moderately successful. But then what the agencies responsible, CWSA, did was to institute an assessment of the situation, and largely they came out of the challenges. If you look at the right side, these were some of the challenges they identify related to water quality. But chief among them is the one we've highlighted red, which shows that the approach to water quality management is reactive, is not proactive, it's not risk-based. So it's when the water is tested and some contamination is found, that's when a kind of a solution is found to it. So that has been the approach that's been around. So the CWSA and the ministry responsible decided to develop a framework as National Drinking Water Quality Management Framework, which they published and also implement certain actions that would ensure that the water that we have in our houses we deliver to rural and urban areas are very clean, and we are able to meet the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, or even some few years before then. Chief among those actions is the finalization of the indicators for monitoring water, incorporating WSP, which is water safety planning, into NDPC, which means that every district assembly would have to report on the number of water safety plans they've implemented for their system, and also incorporate the indicators into what they call the sector information system. But a major action that all stakeholders are supposed to participate in is piloting WSP. WSP has been developed, has been piloted in other places, especially by WHO, World Health Organization. But in Ghana, we haven't really piloted the concept. So that's when the SDG platform came in. So there were other pilots that were done, but the SDG platform also implemented a pilot, which is a project we won under the competition. So let me specifically look at what we were asked to do under the project. We were asked to create an adaptable participatory model to standardize water system quality control in rural, peri-urban, and small towns in Ghana. So then we supposed to promote the idea of WSP. We're supposed to also use the established guidelines. We are supposed to work with the agency solely responsible for CWSA, and also advocate for the integration of WSP in sector activities. So those are the objectives of what we implemented, or the mandate we were given. So for the WSP, what we did was to use the steps that have been instituted or have been piloted and used by WHO that I've shown here. And so I would go through, sorry. I'll go through the activities that we've implemented throughout the project. The first participatory stage, which deals with the engagement process and the formation of the teams. Implementation stage, which deals with participatory water supply chain mapping, identification of risks, participatory planning of control measures and preventive measures. And then we also developed and validated the water safety plan matrix, develop monitoring and verification plans, implement water safety improvements, monitoring of WSP implementation, dissemination at the DA and national level. So specifically, we went through these activities, but what I would do is to just try and summarize the activities for our listeners. We engaged with CWSA, which is the Community Water and Sanitation Agency, and then MMDAs, ministries, the municipalities, or at this stage, we chose a particular district. So it's no more metropolitan municipalities and district assemblies, but specifically we engage with a district assembly, which is the local authority in charge of the communities that we worked in. We did a reconnaissance survey, and then we selected 2 communities. We were supposed to pilot this in 2 major communities, which is a small town community and then a point source community. So 2 communities that had a small town system serving them, which is Achasi and Asamankese in the central region of Ghana in Asin South district, and a point source community which has 3 boreholes and a well. And then we engaged with the community itself. So the main output for this stage is the reconnaissance survey report and the multi-stakeholder engagement report. These activities are important because if you have to implement a WSP in rural areas, one of the things you have to understand is that you are not going to come and just implement and go. The community would have to be involved in the process. So we have to ensure that all that are relevant to this process are engaged, their concerns are sought, and then they are involved in the process from the beginning. So that's what we did at this stage. It is critical to note that there are various power players in the communities and at the district level, and you have to make sure that you engage with them. Otherwise, the WSP process would be stopped. That's why we pointed out that it's important to engage with the traditional and political authority, engagement with community level water management groups, which are already established community level groups, which we call here water and sanitation management teams, or WSM teams, and previously known as the WATSANs. Then we went on to do what we call a baseline study and water system assessment in pilot communities. What is important for us here at this stage is that we want to understand the community. We want to understand the sources of water. We want to understand the water governance system. What kind of communities are there? How are they managing their systems before we can start engaging with them? In addition to this, we also did a water quality test, which is to establish the baselines or to establish the level at which we are at the beginning of the process. So most of these systems, especially the small town system, and don't have water quality tests that you can use as baseline. So you have to conduct it yourself, and that's what we did. Another issue that you have to note is that because this process is not a new process that you have to institute in most of the communities, the already existing system, they already have data. There are other projects running in the community. So you need to also make use of secondary data from a lot of other projects in order to establish your baseline. This baseline, apart from it being important to the process, also important for the verification process at the end of it. That's when you can establish whether you are having improvements or not, or you are stalling, or you are just stagnant, or you're depreciating. And another thing that we also have to look at is the health and education facilities within the system, because these are points people go to. So as we engage with the community, we should also make sure that we assess these communities at the level, at the start of the program, so that when we are engaging with them, the facilitator or the district assembly staff who is engaging with the community or facilitating the process, or the CSO or the CBO, which is facilitating the process, would be able to understand the community better and be able to facilitate the process better. Then we went on to the formation and inauguration of WSP teams. What we need to understand is that in these two communities, there are already water management teams there. There are water boards, there are committees that are in charge of the small town, there's a committee in charge of the point sources. So as you go there establishing a water safety planning team, you must understand and recognize the existing committees that are there. And what we advise at that point is that we don't need to disband those communities or create power bodies within these communities. What we do is an expanded WSMT. So if you have, for example, 5 members there, you add 2 additional members. So what we did in the small town, for example, is that we added 3 people, one who is from the school, a health worker who is the person in charge of the clinic in the community, and then somebody from the local FM or the information center in the community to the existing WSMT, so that you don't have power bodies playing very conflicting roles. And people must also understand the essence of this particular group and also be able to engage with them. So, and at this point, you should also establish that WSP teams are not above the existing WSMTs. WSP teams are expanded teams of the WSMT that are supposed to help. So it's not like you've established another group within the community or superimposing another group within the community. Everybody understands that the legally mandated water management group within the community is the WSMT. The expanded WSMT is just to help with additional duties related to water safety. So these clarifications and these steps are important. Otherwise, you create a lot of problems when you form and inaugurate the teams. You must also make sure that a lot of the community members are involved. That's why we advise that you do a community debate when you are inaugurating the teams. Then we come to the participatory water supply chain mapping, risk identification, and prioritization. So in there, what we did was to engage with the expanded WSMT, which is the water safety planning team, and also co-opt other members of the community to take part in the system assessment and mapping. If we have a bit of time, I'll show you some of the maps that the community members did. You can see how we worked. So you can see the consultants in there. You would see some of the district assembly staff that were involved in this process. So they mapped out the entire water supply system. They identified the risks along the chain. We also explained to them what hazards mean and what hazardous events means. And they are able to tell you specifically what things they are doing in the community that might affect the quality of the water they drink. Most of them pointed out to how people construct their toilets, their bathhouses, and how grey water is allowed to flow around pipes within the community, how people carry water from the tap side to their homes, and sometimes they put items in to prevent a spill. All those activities go a long way to contaminate the water. So they would mention it, and you guide them through the process by letting them list it according to the various stages in the water supply system. We also looking at the participants within this particular engagement, and we want to also state that you should be able to involve the district assembly staff, especially those involved in WASH. So the works engineer who is in charge of WASH, the district environmental health and sanitation officer. In Ghana, they call a lot of them the host, the community development officer, or these days is a social development officer, and the environmental health agents, somebody from NADMO, somebody from the education directorate or department, and then the health department involved in the process. If you're doing it for the first time and your aim is to build capacity of the district assembly, you would have to get them involved. Again, even if not that, you have to get them involved because they have, they supervise the system, they monitor it, they own the system and they manage it. So they have to be aware of the activities you're implementing at that stage. Then also at the community level, you have to involve health and education officers who are teachers and nurses within the community. Women especially and children must be part of this process. Then when you finish the plan itself, what you do is to implement the plan. And what we have shown here is at the point source community. What we've done is to fence the borehole because, you know, most of the boreholes are exposed. That is a risk that is within a lot of the point source community. You see animals, you see people doing a lot of things within on the platforms of the boreholes, which could seep into the underground reserve and could contaminate the water. So what we've done is to fence it, and you could see they use bamboo, which is a local material, and use their own labor to do it. So there are critical things we need to note about implementation of the water safety plan. One is the financial management of the systems, because for water safety plans, you need to fund the activities from within. A lot of the things would have to be funded by the money that you are raising at the system level. So it doesn't have to be looked at as another capital investment. It's an operational expenditure. It's an OPEX. It's not a CAPEX, unless you have to kind of change a part or a major part of the system. It's an operational thing, and we have to make sure that the system is run such that it can fund these activities. Otherwise, what will happen is that every year in and year out, the district assembly or government would have to fund the management or of the system, and to ensure that quality or clean water is delivered onto the people. Another thing you have to make sure you do at this stage is to look at the capacity of the team that is managing the system. Because if you look at 50%, if I have the opportunity to show you some of the risks, you look at 50% of them, it comes from sometimes negligence, sometimes just lack of capacity to manage the systems. For example, for the small town system, the technical officer was dosing in a particular way that would deliver water with high levels of chlorine to various households, and they've been doing it over a period. And again, I would not blame only the technical officer, because the district assembly also has a role to play in monitoring these things. So the capacity of the people managing the system are also important, and also the supervisory role that the district assemblies would have to play in ensuring that the systems run efficiently and sustainably. So these are two things you have to look at when you are implementing the WSP in rural areas. First is the financial management of the systems, and then the capacity of those managing the system. This slide will just show you the improvements that were done. I showed you earlier. For the small town, for example, a typical improvement is the valve chamber. You could see the first one, the valve chamber has rubbish in it. I'm sure there are a lot of things. People urinate in it. I'm sure people dump a lot of items I can't mention here into it. And you could see the risks it poses to the system and the water that is delivered to households. So you see the second picture, that was when the community decided to cover them. And then you see the third picture, it's now covered. So that risk is reduced. The last stage of the implementation and monitoring of the WSP is verification, planning, and implementation. There are three issues that we looked at there, which is compliance monitoring. That one is to ensure that the water you're providing to the people meets national and international standards. And usually it's an independent person that has to do with that. And for our systems, usually CWSA from the regional level, or the risk is tasked to ensure that these protocols are followed. And there's already established guidelines for testing water within our small town systems and our point sources. So we just need to follow that. The second one, which is customer satisfaction, is something that is not done a lot, even in the urban areas. It's not done in the rural areas too. So this probably is a new thing for system managers, that from time to time, they have to ensure that they engage with customers to look at the perception about the quality of service they are providing and the quality of water, and to see whether they can clarify some of the issues, or also do some remedies to their systems and the services they're delivering. So we advise that because of financial issue, we advise that that is done yearly and is supervised by the RICS or CWSA. But again, the system managers can't take advantage of community meetings and debates to also at least ask questions and engage with the community to see whether the services they are providing is moving well or is good, instead of waiting for a whole year to do a full customer satisfaction survey or engagement. Then the last one is the short-term evaluation of results. So before we wait for an independent person to test whether we are conforming to the national and international standards, what we advise is that the technical officers and those working at the system level should be provided equipment, or should have equipment and the capacity to test for basic things, for pH, for color, for chlorine residual, turbidity, total dissolved particles amount added, so that it doesn't have to wait for the entire period waiting for an independent evaluator or an independent body to come and test your water before giving you the results for you to react. So regularly, system managers would have to ensure that they test for these basic items to keep them up and to help them with the management of the system. In addition to what we've done, we also had some supporting programs which were not in the various activities that we implemented. So we have household safe water storage and treatment. We had some engagement with the communities, and we did some education. You can see in the pictures at the schools. And then we also did capacity building workshop, or we organized a capacity building workshop for the WSMTs and the WSP teams. So the initial one I talked about was an orientation, but this specific one, we did a training program for those managing the system so that they will be able to manage it efficiently. Then also other community-led total sanitation and other hygiene promotion activities within the community. We also ensure that we linked our activities to them. What you need to note with these supporting programs is that you have to engage with the community to understand that the safety of your water is not only based on those managing it and where the lines are running through, where you fetch the water, but there are a lot of other issues from sanitation, from agriculture, and other activities within the community that can affect it. So it has to be looked at. It's a systemic. You have to use a systemic approach, or you have to look at it holistically, looked at the entire community and those activities that would affect the quality of the water you take. So community has to be aware of these linkages and be able to engage with you on them. That would ensure that a lot of people will be interested in what you're doing. But if you take it as just one single activity, I'm doing water, so it's water, and you don't look at sanitation, hygiene, how they handle water at home, how they store water at home, where they build their toilets, where they build their bathrooms, where they dump their rubbish, where they for example, the kind of chemicals they use in their farms, where they do it in relation to where their water source is, they would not be able to appreciate the effect that would have on the quality of water. So it's important to engage with them and let them understand these things. So when we finished with this process, for us as facilitators, we disseminated at the district level, and that representative from UNDP, CWSA, the teams itself at the district level, and then the project community is represented at that presentation. We did a regional level dissemination, which we took advantage of a UNICEF Government of Ghana regional wash review workshop, and we did our presentation. At that workshop, there were 5 districts assemblies in there with the officials. UNICEF was there, CWSA was there, and representatives from the Ministry of Sanitation and Water Resources were also there. At the national level, we also presented at the National Rural Sanitation Stock-Taking Workshop. We did a joint presentation with the ministry, with Global WHO, then with UNICEF. They also had some pilots, so we did a joint presentation with them on the various pilots that we implemented during the period. So let me look at the project outcomes. We've been given some objectives and we're supposed to meet them. We've engaged with all the stakeholders, I mentioned them, and we've developed water safety plans for the 2 communities, and we've successfully implemented it. Let me call it the first phase of implementation. Then we were also asked to ensure that we transmit or we build capacity of those involved in the process. And we can say that at the district level, about 10 officials were involved, and out of which 5 can lead the WSC process in other communities on their own. At the community level, we also build the capacity, as I already mentioned, and we are confident that in the next line of activities, or when the district wants to implement WSP in other communities, they have the capacity to lead it, to facilitate it, and to also train other people to be able to scale it up. On the adaptable model, what we've been asked to do is to develop an adaptable model through a participatory approach. So I'll just take you through what we've done. It follows the same guidelines that we use, but what we've done here, you could see some of the items in brackets. Those are the first ones, are the ones you do when you are first implementing it. Then the one in the bracket is what you do when you are repeating the process. So you can see the first one is to engage community and conduct a baseline. Then when you are repeating the process, then what you can do is to do a rapid assessment of existing baselines and then update it. But as I mentioned earlier, if you have a system that is doing short-term evaluations, doing customer satisfaction surveys, engaging with communities, we can continuously update the WSP and institute measures at the community level or system level to ensure that the water we are delivering to our people is clean. What I want to mention about the adaptable model is that there are about 3 pilots that are ongoing. So there's a draft guiding note or model for the implementation of WSP at the rural level. So what the ministry is doing is to pick all the lessons from these pilots and finalize the guiding note, which will be used by all within the country. So at this level, we've submitted what we've learned, some of the issues in there, the stages that we've identified to the ministry, and they will integrate that into the national guiding notes for the implementation of WSP at the rural level. So the last one I talked about, it's dissemination of findings. I talked about it. Now we're doing the webinar, that's why you can see it in red. And let me look at the lessons we've learned. I mentioned already that you must make sure that the teams at the community level is an expanded WSMT so that you don't duplicate the roles and create conflict. I also mentioned that you must ensure the systems are run sustainably, ensure that there's financial sustainability at the system level. Otherwise, you can't really implement your WSP. And capacity building is also critical to this process. And then people have to understand that WSP involves a lot of things, and it must be approached in an integrated manner or a systemic manner. Then one last thing I want to mention is that baseline and water quality testing is critical to the process. I want to look at so far what we've done in the country at the national level, and in addition to the pilots that, for example, SDG, UNICEF, Safe Water Network, and other stakeholders have implemented. At the national level, they established a committee to oversee the implementation of the framework. Then they've published the National Drinking Water Quality Management Framework. The indicators have been finalized and submitted to the National Development Planning Commission, which would ensure that you can measure progress in terms of WSP implementation. And then the Ghana Standard 786 has also been updated, and it includes recommended code for hygienic practice for collecting, processing, and marketing of potable water. So now there's a standard for those who, not only for those who produce bottled water and sachet water in the country, but even those who provide tanker services, those who sell water, those who pipe water, those who manage it. There's a standard that you have to keep to. And if you don't keep to that, the law is there to deal with you. And then the ministry continues to disseminate countrywide the framework and also build capacity at the district level for the implementation of water safety planning. And then, as I talked about, to update the guidance notes for WSP implementation. So far at the national level, this is where we've gotten to in the implementation of WSP and ensuring that we deliver clean water to our people and move our country towards achieving SDG 6 in 2030. Thank you very much.
Mr. Biscoff, thank you very much for delivering such an interesting presentation. And for those of the participants who joined us later, I would like to repeat it again, that the presentation was delivered by Mr. Kofi Biscoff from Trend Group. This is one of the Innovation Challenge winners of the SDG Philanthropy platform. So now we would like to move to the Q&A session, and let me take this opportunity and ask you the first question. The presentation was a very exemplary situation how local communities can collaborate with local authorities in achieving sustainable development goals, in particular SDG number 6. Based on your experience, we also can see that there was a lot of behavioral change and engaged in this process. And also, you managed to create the sense of ownership from the local communities. Could you please tell us which incentives did you use for this to happen? Thank you very much.
Okay. Let me start from this point. You don't seriously need an incentive at the community level to get people to be involved in planning and working towards delivering clean water to their households. At the district level, they already understand the problems at the system, in the systems. They already sometimes are working towards it. And so when they look at the concepts, they look at the processes through which you're going, and they realize that these are low-hanging fruits that we can pluck for now whilst we look for capital to invest in the systems. They follow. So nobody has been given money. Nobody's promised any other thing. But the system, for example, the small town water system is already in the system. They are paying for the water. And so when you engage with them to tell them that is also to improve the quality of the water you're already paying for, I think the objective is enough incentive for them to get involved in the process. Hello? Hello?
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you. Apologies, there was some technical issue again. Thank you. Now I would like to invite our participant, Lauren. She would like to ask you another question. Also encourage other webinar participants to type your questions in the chat box or somehow let us know if you have questions. Lauren, please.
Yes, hello. I have a question. I was wondering, you have spoken about how the community activities can affect the quality of the water, such as agriculture and things like that. But I was wondering, have there been any studies done yet about how the positive effects of those projects can affect agriculture itself? Like growth in agriculture, things like that?
No, not within the scope of this particular project.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Biskov. If there are any questions, I would like to give the opportunity to participants to ask them. Otherwise, I think we can conclude our interesting session. And please feel free to email us questions either to me or to Mr. Biskov so that we can handle them after the webinar. Thank you very much, everyone, and apologies for technical inconveniences in the beginning. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right.